This is the story of sundry African slaves brought to the New World on the Spanish slave ship Isabelita. There was no photography in 1817, so we rely on legal documents that include archaic terms that some may find offensive. But this is real history, and it helps us understand and learn from the past. The United States Supreme Court decided the fate of the Africans illegally brought into the country on the Isabelita. They came ashore at Fernandina in Spanish East Florida in 1817. William Bowen, a Milledgeville businessman, purchased them at auction and marched them overland hundreds of miles into the Creek Nation in Georgia, where a United States Customs official detained them. State law provided for their return to Africa, but legal claims would intervene. In Havana in 1818, Don Juan Madrazo worried when his ship, crew, and cargo of slaves vanished on the high seas. Weeks passed with no word of the Isabelita. Madrazo paid $4,000 for the ship in 1816. Bankrolling her trip to Africa a year later meant another $17,569 to pay sailors and to buy provisions and trade goods. A successful trip might double or triple his investment, but failure meant a total loss since the ship wasn't insured. In early 1818, a Spanish official in Charleston discovered the Isabelita in port there. Spain sued in the United States District Court to seize the vessel, which was eventually returned to Madrazo. But finding and reclaiming the Isabelita's human cargo proved much harder. Nameless, anonymous, and unable to communicate with their captors, 112 Africans seemingly dissolved into the Georgia wilderness, led by William Bowen, a man anxious to avoid the law or anyone hostile to his scheme. Former Georgia Governor David B. Mitchell was the federal agent to the American Indians at the Creek Agency in 1818 when Bowen's party arrived. Mitchell puzzled over the peculiar assembly of whites, slaves, and a Creek Indian guide. He detained them, suspecting that the Africans had been illegally smuggled into the state. Bowen had a Camden County, Georgia bill of sale for the Africans, a pure fabrication meant to assure Mitchell that the slaves were legal U.S. property. Taking the document at face value, Mitchell gave Bowen permission to proceed through the Creek Nation to Spanish West Florida, but en route, McQueen McIntosh, the United States Customs official from Darien, detained the party. McIntosh had been on Bowen's trail for weeks, somehow learning of the slaves smuggled into Georgia. McIntosh apprehended about 97 at the Creek Agency and started them on the road to the state capital, Milledgeville. Georgia law prohibited the importation of slaves but didn't say what to do with those illegally brought here. In December 1817, Georgia's General Assembly hastily corrected this defect, authorizing the governor to detain, quote, any Negroes, mulattoes, or persons of color smuggled into Georgia, and to then turn them over to the governor. That's just what McQueen McIntosh did. Like Don Juan Madrazo, William Bowen now faced the total loss of his investment. Federal law extinguished his rights to the slaves, stating that, quote, neither the importer nor any person or persons claiming from or under him shall hold any right or title whatsoever to any Negro, mulatto, or person of color, nor to the service or labor thereof, who may be imported or brought within the United States or territories thereof in violation of the law. With William Bowen's claim of ownership nullified by law, Madrazo could step in, prove ownership, and establish that he was not complicit in smuggling the Africans into the country, and then recover them. Word finally reached Madrazo in Havana in the spring of 1820, when William Reynolds, a Charleston lawyer, arrived there. He agreed to represent Madrazo and recover his cargo of slaves, quote, for such compensation as Madrazo would allow. Legal proceedings commenced in May 1820, when Georgia's governor filed suit in U.S. District Court in Savannah, seeking forfeiture of the Africans to the state. The lawsuit named, quote, sundry African slaves, close quote, as defendants, meaning the governor did not know the identity of their rightful owner. Extinguishing claims to them would open the way for the governor to return them to Africa. In reality, the state had already disposed of many of the slaves, selling 63 men and boys at auction, quote, at the state house door in Milledgeville, close quote, in August 1818 for $41,710. After expenses of $14,038.18, the sale netted the state $27,671. The 47 Africans still in state custody were females. They had been leased to parties contractually obligated to provide, quote, food, clothing, and humane treatment. One traveler reported that he had seen, quote, said African Negroes working on the road leading from Holt's Ferry to Milledgeville under the immediate direction of Mr. Henry Darnell, who was said to be under the control of the governor of Georgia. In return, the state received, quote, upwards of $1,200. William Bowen claimed that he had paid, quote, a valuable consideration, close quote, for the slaves, who had been, quote, violently, forcibly, and illegally taken by one McQueen McIntosh under an authority or pretended authority as a revenue officer of the post of Darien, close quote. Bowen wanted them back. He acknowledged bringing them into the country, but claimed no law had been broken. The statute prohibited importation with intent to hold, sell, or dispose of slaves, but he didn't mean to do any of those things. He claimed he only meant to pass through on his way to Spanish West Florida. The judge didn't buy it. Quote, I am of the opinion, he decreed, that the proof produced by the governor of Georgia appertains beyond a doubt that the African Negroes were illegally brought into the United States and then held to service or labors contrary to the law with the knowledge and consent of the claimant Bowen, and I do therefore reject the claim of William Bowen with costs. Before the governor could do anything with the captive women and girls, Don Juan Madrazo asserted his claim. The Augusta Chronicle reported on November 6, 1821, that a, quote, new and unexpected claim has made its appearance in the name of John Madrazo, seeking a recovery of the Negroes on hand and the proceeds of those that have been sold, close quote. Several Havana businessmen swore that the Africans would have, quote, brought in this market if exposed to public sale, males and females, grown persons and children, an average price of $350 each, close quote. That proved conservative, for the 1818 auction in Milledgeville brought twice that price, albeit for all males. The district court rejected Madrazo's claim, finding that the successor privateer had legally seized the enslaved Africans, that a tribunal in Fernandina had effectually extinguished Madrazo's rights, and that William Bowen had taken clear title that he had subsequently squandered by smuggling the slaves into the United States. So what was to be done with, quote, the Negroes now in controversy, close quote? The judge held that the, quote, marshal should deliver them over to His Excellency John Clark, governor of the state of Georgia, to be disposed of according to law upon the payment of costs. Also, as to the proceeds of such of the Negroes as have been sold, I do further decree that the same remain in the treasury of the state of Georgia, close quote. When Madrazo and Bowen appealed, the appellate court sided with Madrazo, holding that the successor was an illegal privateer, so that Madrazo was entitled to, quote, the restitution of his plundered property, close quote. The court awarded the slaves and funds in the state treasury to Madrazo. The legal drama continued. Bowen appealed to the United States Supreme Court, the final arbiter of the issue of ownership of the Africans who had now been in America more than a decade. Justice William Johnson, Jr. found Madrazo's reasoning persuasive. He noted that Bowen had broken the law by smuggling enslaved people into the country. Quote, the cargo was Madrazo's. It was captured by a privateer, fitted out in Baltimore, run into Fernandina, there sold to Bowen, carried across the country to the Creek Agency within the limits of the United States, and although Bowen, the tortious owner, committed an offense by introducing them into the country, Madrazo was not privy to that offense and was innocent of any act that could work a forfeiture of his interest, close quote. Therefore, Johnston concluded, Madrazo's claim was valid. A majority of the court disagreed, finding in favor of Georgia's governor. Justice Johnson protested that the governor had already sold half the Africans. Quote, "The slaves, as well as the proceeds of those which were sold, it is notorious, have in fact been delivered up by the state to one of the parties in the case." Which one? The American Colonization Society? Don Juan Madrazo? In disbelief, Justice Johnson spat the answer. The state had, quote, "surrendered them to Bowen instead of Madrazo," close quote. Incensed, Justice Johnson asked how the smuggler had prevailed in this complex legal contest. How had the man whose claims had, quote, "failed in every court below and must fail wherever the rights are subjected to judicial cognizance," close quote, persuaded the state to give him the Africans? As far back as the summer of 1818, it seems, Bowen had the political pull to regain possession of some of the Africans. Despite the clear provisions of the anti-smuggling statutes, Bowen would keep the Africans as slaves in America. Through decades of legal wrangling, nobody inquired of the Africans their wishes. Hundreds of pages of legal documents provide no information about them, their names, who they left behind, what they wanted to do, where they wished to go. These questions went unasked. In the eyes of the law, the Africans were just property, without rights. As the years and then decades passed, the Isabelita's Africans melted into America's slave population, unidentified, anonymous. Their descendants, unaware, live among us today. Thank you for watching this Georgia Backroads program.